Welcome to another edition of Market Pulse, which is a joint initiative between SC Securities and Daily FT. I'm Nistar Kasim, the editor of the Daily FT and the host for this edition. We have with us frontier market specialists and the co-founder of Tundra from Sweden, who is co-founder as well as the chief investment officer, Mattias Martinsson, to talk to us about the prospects for equities for both foreign investors as well as Sri Lankans. Mattias is in town to attend the Sri Lanka Investor Forum organized by the Colombo Stock Exchange and the Securities and Exchange Commission. He also made a presentation for all the investors who were present, to about 500, of which about 100 were foreign investors. I'd like to welcome Mattias for Market Pulse.
Thank you.
I understand that your funds under management is about $1 billion.
That's correct.
And then I'd like you to sort of help understand how diverse is the portfolio and what is the focus on regional markets in Sri Lanka and Pakistan onwards. Just what's the founders, Tundra's focus on, or whether you can share a geographical breakdown of the assets possible?
Sure, absolutely. So I think first of all, out of the $1 billion, around 300 million are what we call frontier markets, where Sri Lanka is one part of them.
Right.
In frontier markets, we have our own definition. So we look, instead of looking at the indices like MSCI has or FTSE indices, we look at the World Bank definition. So where and World Bank divides the world into 4 income categories. Okay. So you have the richest countries of the world, the high income countries, like Sweden, United States. Okay. Then you have the upper middle income countries, which are countries that have come kind of middle way, which are China, Mexico, Brazil. Okay. So the 2 lowest categories, lower middle income countries and low income countries, that is what we define as frontier markets. Okay. So that's 50% of the world's population today. Okay. In 50 years, it's going to be 2/3. Okay. And out of these markets, we have identified 8 or 10 which have reasonably developed equity markets and who offer a strong long-term growth perspective. Okay. So in our frontier portfolio, the largest market today is Pakistan. Yes. Which is around 1/3. Okay. Then comes Vietnam, which is around 1/6. Okay. And then comes actually Sri Lanka on 3rd place with 13% of assets approximately.
Okay, fine, interesting. And how long have you been investing in Sri Lanka? And what kind of, I'm trying to take your original investment, so what drew you to that particular investment scenario?
Yeah. We have been investing in Sri Lanka since 2013 when we launched the fund. Yeah. But I came across Sri Lanka already before that in 2008. Okay. So I was here, a friend took me here on kind of a 2-week trip. And I kind of fell in love with the country. But I also saw that there were a lot of interesting companies here. So I've been watching the Sri Lankan equity market for longer than we have been invested.
Okay, interesting. How attractive is Sri Lanka, 10 years later, when you compare to some of its peers, regional peers?
Well, I think there are, of course, if we look at the other markets where we invest, markets like Pakistan, Indonesia, Bangladesh, Vietnam, etc. Okay. Those countries are, of course, much larger. They have a larger population. Yes. The population is also younger in those countries. Yes. Those countries are more a case of industrialization, new factories being built, etc. I think the trajectory for Sri Lanka is different. It's a smaller country. You need to be careful with your nature, which is your main advantage today. So I think Sri Lanka will be more a service-driven economy, where you have your comparative advantages with your location, of course. True. You're 50 kilometers from India, which is an amazing advantage. Right. But you also have your natural deep sea ports, which can continue to develop that will lead to more trade being undertaken, which will trickle down to the service. But you also have, and kind of what I saw the first time I came here, that you have your amazing advantage on the tourism side. So if we look at Sri Lanka today, how many tourists that arrive in Sri Lanka, it's actually not that much more than Mauritius. And Mauritius is 1/3 of the size of Sri Lanka. So I think, I believe that anyone that comes here, even if it's the highest end tourist who wants the perfect hotels, or if it's adventurous, Sri Lanka is, for me at least, my favorite place in the world. And I think a lot of other people around the world will feel the same. So last year you had 2 million tourists arriving. I think that number can easily double within a 5-year or 6-year period. Provided that infrastructure is built, in terms of airports and roads, etc. And that will also create economic growth. And I spoke to my middle son yesterday. So he's traveling in Asia, and he now decided to go to Sri Lanka as well. So he's coming for 3 weeks.
Excellent. Interesting perspective. Because you love Sri Lanka, does it sort of influence your investment decisions as well?
Well, I think we're very, if we look at the markets, and that's not only Sri Lanka, the key disadvantage with frontier markets is that the equity markets are less developed, which means liquidity is lower. That means that if you, like we have $300 million in assets that we need to invest $3 to $6 million in any company minimum. That means that with the low liquidity, we must be very long term. Because if we try to trade in and out of different stocks, we're going to lose a lot of returns. So we try to focus on 10 years, 20 years, 30 years ahead. If you're going to take that long-term decision, it needs to be kind of the foundation of the company. That is the crucial part, which is management, the owners, etc. And it also needs to be combined with the preconditions of the country. So I think my love for Sri Lanka is, I think, is well based on kind of the strong long-term advantages that the country has and what it can offer for a businessman or a tourist that arrives here.
So you are by character is a long-term investor. Tundra is a long-term investor. How has the portfolio fared? I think it's about just over 10 years in Sri Lanka. How has the portfolio performed? And from the time you came, have you exited some investments as well?
Well, we've had, I think since we started investing here in 2013, we've had probably 25 or so companies during those years. Now we're down to a handful of companies. So we have made exits, concentrated the portfolio. Returns since we started, we're up a little bit, but it's not that much so far. But I think it's not very much different from frontier markets in general, which has been almost flat since we launched the fund. So I think the important part is, I think, what is ahead. And I think we're now entering a period where, due to the crisis that Sri Lanka has gone through, there's been a reset of the economy, which normally means that you should have 6-7 years ahead of you that will reward investors a little bit more.
So you said Sri Lanka, post-crisis, there is a reset. How long does a reset take place? Take in terms of, and how are we progressing in that resetting the economy?
Well, I think since we started investing, I would say around, we started in 2013. I would say from 2015 and onwards, the main concern for foreign investors was your foreign debt exposure and the potential risks ahead if something would happen. Then you were, of course, extremely unlucky with the 2019 events and COVID, the two disastrous events for a country who is so dependent on tourism revenue. So it's not surprising that you had a number of years when basically everything that could go wrong went wrong, combined with political decisions that were questionable, so to say. But normally what happens after a crisis like that, and Sweden had also a major crisis in 1992, where we had a managed currency and we had some fixed idea of how to run the economy, which didn't work. But what happens afterwards, after the devaluation, after the debt restructuring, after getting a new political establishment on the ground, is that the clogs that were in the economy have opened up. And that means that I think the natural trajectory of a country like Sri Lanka is upwards. In the longer run.
Yes.
And now you don't have those hurdles in the way. As I said yesterday in my presentation, I don't think that it's not about we should grow 7-8% a year. I don't think Sri Lanka is an economy like that. You need to grow carefully, but even though 4% a year, 3 to 5% a year, that's going to bring you significantly higher versus developed markets in the years to come. And I think that's enough, and it's going to bring prosperity to the people.
In this recovery scenario and reset, and then you see an upward trajectory, what sectors you see a high growth potential, which also might be of interest for foreign investors?
Well, I think Sri Lanka, one of the advantages is that you have a lot of listed companies, 285 listed companies.
Do you think it is very high from a...
It's in line with the other markets where we invest, but we want equity markets with a lot of listings, with a long history, because companies that have been listed for a long time, they've learned from their mistakes, and investors are kind of more aware of what questions they should ask. So it normally means higher quality. So Sri Lanka had Ceylon Cold Stores was listed in 1896, I think. So it's kind of a long history, and that's I think that's a good precondition to be able to find companies. And due to the fact that you have so many listed companies, you also have them across different sectors. For Tundra, we are, given that we're so long-term and we invest for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, we prefer companies who can do well over several cycles. That means that we're not so enthusiastic about sectors like cement or kind of cyclical sectors with a lot of price volatility. But I think anything that will kind of be in line with the growing consumer staples, for example, but also financials, of course. The better banks I think is a good investment, and also the renewable energy space, companies that benefit from that, not necessarily only the companies who produce it, but also those who could be suppliers to that industry.
Do you see, you have already taken position in some of these sectors, is that what you were saying?
Oh yes.
You have taken positions already. And any sector that you feel that Tundra hasn't really tapped, or you feel that you have done fairly satisfactory in terms of sectors exposed?
No, I think we have quite a diverse portfolio. We have in healthcare, consumer staples, financials, renewable energy. So I'd say that we're pretty well covered for kind of an exposure to the overall development of the economy. So
excellent. Usually the expectation from capital markets promoters is to ensure the funds have a high allocation to Sri Lanka. I mean, has that happened over the last few years, or in terms of where Tundra sort of increases its allocation to Sri Lanka listed equities?
We actually we were a bit concerned with Sri Lanka in 2019 after the Easter attacks. So from 2019 to 2020, we decreased our positions a bit because we felt that you have also had political happenings in the country. But then we stuck around in the market. So when we entered the crisis, say from mid 2021, somewhere there, when it really the crisis really took hold of the country, I think we had around a 6% position in the country.
Okay.
So we took some hits on that portfolio,
Right.
but we also increased a little bit in the early 2022.
Okay.
So since then the position has grown a bit.
Grown a bit. What prospects? I know you're very bullish about Sri Lanka. You said, and you're passionate about Sri Lanka. What kind of expectation can we have from Tundra going forward in the next 3 to 5 years? What do you think there'll be a sort of a doubling or kind of of allocation or investments over the medium term?
Well, I think we made an increase mid last year because we got the new larger client that came in and who were also interested in Sri Lanka. So hopefully, as our client base grows, part of those money will go to Sri Lanka as well. And I also think, as I said yesterday, I think a reasonable return in the equity market over time, currency adjusted, is around 10%. So we're not, when we say we're bullish, I'm bullish in the way that I think that we can have good long-term returns in Sri Lanka. We don't chase the sharp swings upward. We're not so concerned about corrections, etc. But I think we are at the stage where Sri Lanka can give a good comparative return versus other equity markets.
You mentioned about some of the concerns. Liquidity is a big issue. Then currency risk was an issue. You think we are behind in terms of currency? You think we are behind the crisis, uncertainty or the risk?
Yeah, I think among our countries, I think Sri Lanka has actually the best opportunity to have a stable currency. But that is due to your comparative advantage in tourism. You have remittances just like all our other countries as well.
That's right.
But also given that you're not really, compared to a country like Pakistan, those countries, they go through massive industrial cycles where they import a lot of heavy equipment, and then something happens with the economy and you have a crash in the currency. I think Sri Lanka, given that it should be a service-driven economy, and you have that extra flow of capital coming in from tourism, Sri Lanka should be able to, provided that there's fiscal discipline and that is decent economic policies in place, should be able to have a positive balance of payment over the long run, and that should mean a stable currency.
Stable currency. We have almost completed the external debt restructuring last year, and some of the it's in motion in terms of finalizing the agreements. From a fund manager perspective, what do you hear in markets among investment circles? You think everyone else is also looking at Sri Lanka in terms of now that the stability and recovery is in place?
To be honest, no. And I think the problem, and I showed a graph of that yesterday as well, that you're not alone. All emerging markets have outflows. So investors are, I think the geopolitical situation in the world is one reason, of course. I actually do believe that the smaller emerging markets and frontier markets like Sri Lanka, in this environment, especially in this environment, can actually benefit a bit. Because what we see is that the main fighters in this geopolitical tension is the US and China. And both are kind of reducing the trade with each other. But they're also increasing their trade with other countries. So we see that in the ASEAN countries. China is increasing trade with them. US is increasing trade with them, and US and China are reducing. So I think Sri Lanka, you're not a threat to the US. I think it's rather someone that they want to be their friend. So I think there are benefits for countries like Sri Lanka. And I think it's also it's important that you maintain kind of a neutral geopolitical stance. You can be a partner to China, you can be a partner to India, you can be a partner to the US. So to have a neutral stance, just like Singapore has done over the years.
Yes, you did mention about Singapore as size doesn't matter or doesn't mean everything, but we have been comparing trying to follow Singapore model, but we haven't got it right so far. From your perspective, how can Sri Lanka become another Singapore, but might be better than Singapore in terms, because we are a natural resources rich country, and it's with given our cellular. How can Sri Lanka become at least do better in sort of emulating Singapore?
Well, I think you have a lot of the preconditions in place.
Okay.
Location here is actually perfect.
Okay.
I would say outside the fact that you're just next to India,
Yes.
and you have kind of the deep sea ports infrastructure, you have good literacy rate, you have good gender equality, you have good education by frontier standard.
Yeah.
The natural preconditions are in place. What you don't have, you have democracy here in Sri Lanka, which hasn't really been the case, maybe in Singapore to the same extent.
Yeah.
The advantage of having a more autocratic society means that decisions can be taken faster and without the same scrutiny. So it's going to take longer in Sri Lanka. Okay. But I think having you have kind of the natural advantages with the location, you have the tourism coming in, but you also have kind of I would say the qualitative factors. The fact that Sri Lanka is actually a country where people like James, the other fund manager yesterday, and myself, we could actually consider living here, which I love the other countries we invest in as well, but I probably wouldn't bring my family there. Yes. Here I could bring my family. Okay. So it's going to be interesting to see what you can do with the port city, if that can be kind of developed to some sort of financial hub. Yes. Maybe Tundra will have an office here. So I wouldn't exclude it. And if you bring enough of those investors into the country and you provide kind of stable conditions for them, it's not, I think it might sound ridiculous to compare with Singapore, but it's possible over the long run if the right policies are taken. So I wouldn't exclude it.
Okay. Politics, always you mentioned about you always factor the political risk. With the recent development in Sri Lanka, peacefully transition of a new government and a very popular government, are you more optimistic about Sri Lanka's political stability?
I would say that 1 year ago, one and a half year ago, we highlighted the possible political changes as the major risk, because we didn't know Mr. Dissanayaka. Yes. We didn't know what kind of policies he would put in place. So it was a concern for foreign investors. That kind of changed to euphoria when investors suddenly decided that this is actually a good thing. And I think it's still early to say what is his long-term agenda. He's gotten a lot of political power now, which can be good if it's used in the right way. Indications that we've seen so far is that he's taking sensible decisions, which is approved by corporates in the country. I think especially after a crisis like this, when you have this despair that you had a really, really bad crisis, one of the worst that I've ever seen. I think it's important to kind of also in the mindset of people do a reset and to kind of instill hope of a change. So I think it was important that you got a completely new leader who can kind of start fresh, and where the population also feels that at least he's not going to do the same as all the other political leaders we've had. So I think hope is a very powerful factor, and hopefully he will continue to take the right decisions that will develop Sri Lanka as a nation.
That's right. And in terms of, you did spoke about the opportunities. What risks to Sri Lanka be concerned about? We have yes, we are not directly impacted by the global trade war. Any other risks that you feel that Sri Lanka should be, it looks like things are looking good, promising. Sometimes it can also make you very complacent. What kind of risks should Sri Lanka be worried about from a country perspective?
Well, I think from a risk perspective, of course, you have your kind of vulnerable from the service side, the tourism side.
Yes.
I think what happened in 2019 and 2020, those are normally once in a decade events. And you can't really predict them. It's like predicting car crashes.
Yeah.
Those are vulnerabilities that should there be something similar happening and that would hurt the tourism industry.
Yeah.
But all the government, what Sri Lanka can do is can just try to ensure that you have kind of safety measures in place in order to ensure that something like 2019 doesn't happen. You still remain vulnerable on the debt side.
Yeah.
You're more than 100% debt to GDP, which is a high level.
Yes.
So I think in that aspect, it's important that the IMF agreement, that all the kind of the parts of that agreement is followed. But I can't really see any indications that they wouldn't.
Okay.
So it's. I think it's on the debt side still, and on the tourism side, there are the kind of major risk for Sri Lanka.
And given the, you see, there was emphasis during the forum about continuity, consistency, clarity, and all that. Then there was mention about a budget, 2025 budget as well. Do you think the right building blocks are being put by the new administration here in trying to stimulate the economy and also more managing the fiscal situation as well? Do you see that happening in Sri Lanka?
Well, I think, as you know, Sweden, we have a long history of social democracy.
Yes.
I would say we're probably more leaning towards Mr. Dissanayaka's historical ambitions. So I would say that any kind of long-term stable society, you need to reduce the inequalities in society.
Yeah.
So we have no issues with that. I think that's a good decision, and that's a good ambition for Sri Lanka.
Yeah.
The only important part at this stage now, of course, you can highlight small measures here and there, etc., which is, I think it's the bigger picture that is important, and that is to provide stability.
Okay.
So the corporates understand what environment will they have in the next 5 years, what will taxation be, what can they import, what can they not, etc. So you can do long-term planning.
Yeah.
Because if politicians can provide a stable frame ground, that means that corporates can kind of work around that, and they can take long-term decisions, which means investments, which creates jobs. So stability, I would say, is the key, and I think that's what they've achieved so far.
Okay. Maybe final questions before we wrap it up. You mentioned about Sri Lanka's cost of transaction is relatively higher than the peers, as well as other issue that we have been facing is a liquidity issue. What would be your recommendation to resolve these two constraints?
Well,
transaction cost.
Yeah. I think today it's the case that if I do a trade below $300,000, which is often the case because it takes time to buy positions, it will cost me approximately 1% commission. Okay. If I do the same trade in Pakistan or Vietnam, it's going to cost me 15 basis points. Okay. So these times, especially for fund managers, the cost perspective, we get criticized for spending too much. So that's a negative. For Sri Lanka, that means that when we do trades, I need to assure that it's of a certain size, and I can't trade too often because it's going to cost and it's going to end up in my P&L for the fund. Right. On the other hand, for example, the taxes part of the commission, that's around 40 basis points. With the current liquidity in Sri Lanka, that amounts to approximately $18 million of taxes in fees and taxes a year.
80 million.
1.8. Okay. It's not a huge amount, but it's still those money. Maybe they are needed for something. Okay. But provided that they can find another source for that money, I think that would be a good first step and a good signal to the market to take away. For the commissions part, that's around 60 basis points, and that's a regulated part. I don't know if that is needed for the brokers to survive, and that is the reason. Then maybe you want to find another way to ensure that you have good enough brokers around you. Because I think the commission side should be able to come down to, say, 10-15 basis points for large transactions, so that you're on par with the other countries. But it's important, of course, that if you change your cost structure, you need to see what is that money used for, and can we find another way to replace it.
In terms of liquidity, by any recommendations, how can Colombo actually improve the liquidity levels? That's one question. Of course, then the long-standing issue about listing state-owned enterprise, partial or full listing. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's of course, if we look, first of all, the size of the equity market means that liquidity can only be so much.
Yes.
But if we compare to Pakistan, for example, which is more actively traded, so if we take the market cap, we take transaction volume divided by market cap.
Okay.
Sri Lanka should be able to do around 40 million a day if you have the same activity.
Okay.
That maybe can be solved by lowering the transaction cost.
Okay.
I don't know, but I think it would help. But that's definitely an achievable level. For new listings, I wouldn't exclude us participating. I would love to see, for example, the airport listed.
Okay.
We own airports in other countries. I think that's an asset that we like.
Okay.
But it needs to be of a certain size. We didn't participate in this Pick Me IPO, for example, because we would have owned too much of the company.
Okay.
So it needs to be a certain size, but larger assets, so maybe an airport company, that could be something.
Or a terminal company, shipping terminal company?
Yeah, absolutely. We own, to some extent, we have positions there, but I think also we own harbors in general. So that's also something that could be interesting.
Okay. Given your passion and that you also might consider leaving, settling down one day in Sri Lanka, what would be your advice to Sri Lanka in general, and also to policymakers? What would be your advice in sort of getting things right better and faster? What would be your advice?
Well, I don't think my experience of Sri Lankans is that there's a lot of resilience here among the people. I think at the stage you are in, you lived through a terrible crisis, and you're now out on the other side. So I couldn't. I think it's rather kind of to say that it's amazing that you made it through, despite everything that happened.
Yeah.
And now you should get the rewards for that. And I think that's going to come natural. And I don't think really that you need our advice for that.
Okay. I forgot to ask this about, you mentioned about Sri Lanka can return to being a safe haven for investors. How long do you think, what's your personal estimate, how long will it take for us to become a safe haven?
Well, I think based on our analysis, the preconditions are in place now.
Okay.
Then the question is when other foreign investors will see it the way that me and James see it.
Yes.
But I think it's, given the size, the manageability of the country, it's a friendly country. People love to come here. You have kind of the natural advantages around you, and you have the preconditions in place to have a stable currency. So I think this should be, it's going to be a small part, but it should be a part of most emerging markets investors' portfolio.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Mattias, for spending your valuable time with us, with Market Pulse. And you have been very candid, very, very sincere. I see a Sri Lankan in you more than a Swedish person. And I hope you'll continue to enjoy not only investing in Sri Lanka, but living in Sri Lanka going forward. On behalf of SC Securities and the Daily FT, I'd like to thank you once again and wish you all the best.
Thank you.
And we will come back with another interesting edition of Market Pulse in the next few days. Thank you.